Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising books, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, new release, The Joy of Cruising Again, as well as other fun, informative global cruise personalities. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests. If you hear about a cruise that interests you, book it at www.thejoyofacation.com or enter to win a free cruise for two. Again, www.thejoyofacation.com. We really appreciate your feedback, so leave us a text. Paul can't reply, but he may read your text on the air.
Hello, passionate cruisers. This is Paul, and I am joined by a special guest, my wife Cheryl, to share our thoughts on the Soul Train cruise. Longtime listeners and readers of my books know of my fascination with themed cruises, especially my first cruising book, The Joy of Cruising, where I included a section on themed cruising and featured a chapter on my first themed cruise, Festival at Sea, and a chapter about Star Vista Live, a company that does a series of themed cruises about various music genres, including the Soul Train cruise. The Soul Train cruise was on my bucket list, and we are glad to check it off. My attraction to themed cruising is simple. The passengers on board are not only passionate about cruising, but they are also passionate about the theme, the subject of the cruise. So every one of them has something in common that drew them to that cruise. Almost everyone is friendly and is very low in drama and very high in chill. Theme cruises feel like a giant family reunion. Soul Train has a long legacy, and it is only fitting that the host is Tony Cornelius, son of the Soul Train television host Don Cornelius. We loved it, but would we do it again? Check out our thoughts. Sunday Embarkation Day. The first day of the Soul Train cruise was about as good as a cruise's embarkation day could be. For starters, and I don't know if this is normal for Holland America Line or how, or if Star Vista Live had anything to do with the very organized embarkation, but we were on board maybe 10 minutes from the time the porter took our luggage. Then our cabin was ready by the time we boarded. We were not used to that. Shortly thereafter, our luggage was delivered with a knock on the door, and our room steward brought the luggage into the room. Again, a first for us. Our luggage always is left outside the door, and sometimes I've had to go get them down the hall.
The cabin was really nice, adequate size, plenty of storage, decent sized veranda. Two things we noticed immediately. First, the bathroom had a shower curtain instead of a glass enclosure. Second, instead of the TV centered in front of the bed, our preference, it was centered between the bed and a sitting area beside the bed. So Paul was always on my side. We ate at the buffet and we're pleased with the selection of our meals. We each had Caesar salads and desserts. Yes, they had anchovies, and Paul was pleased. We did browse the hot food selection, and we noticed a few soul food-oriented choices. For instance, there was a Rick barbecue ribs. We thought to ourselves, who is Rick? Well, more on that shortly. After eating and attending a user-friendly muster drill, we headed straight to the cabin. Yes, skipping the sail away festivities. Why? Because we watched the Philadelphia Eagles decimate the Washington Commanders, and the Kansas City Chiefs squeaked past the Buffalo Bills. After that, we knew it was going to be a great Super Bowl matchup. We had our first meal at the main dining room Sunday evening. We actually ate all of our dinner meals at the main dining room except one. On one night, we had dinner at the Taramon, a Pan-Asian specialty restaurant with stellar reputation across Hal. At the main dining room, just as with the buffet, we noticed a soul food influence, as well as New Orleans favorites. Things became into perspective when I read a tent card on the table. The card provided bios on 3 chefs cultivating the meals in the main dining room for the week of the Soul Train cruise. For us, that was a pleasant surprise. We later found out this is the 3rd year for the visiting chefs on the Soul Train cruise, and there were actually 4 chefs. Remember Rick barbecue ribs at the buffet? Well, that was Chef Ricky Simpson Jr., an Atlanta chef whose credo is to enlighten people to a healthier way to make their favorite foods. The others were Chef Sandra Dre Rhodes, bringing Creole and Southern country cuisine to your table. Chicago's Chef George Outlaw, specializing in elevated soul food with bold and unusual flavor combinations. And Chef Jerome Brown, aka Chef Rome, the chef to the stars. With over 35 years of professional cooking experience, he's become the go-to chef for the celebrities worldwide.
More about food and the chefs on New Amsterdam later. We're still getting through what I said was a wonderful embarkation day. We finally emerged from our cabin after the playoffs ended, so the first entertainment we availed ourselves of was a stand-up comedy show. We love stand-up comedy. The Soul Train is adults only, and accordingly, every one of the comedians were real and raw and hilarious. The comedian we saw on embarkation night was Sean Jones. He was the funniest I have ever experienced. I cried, literally, or as Sean would say, I peed a little. We closed out the first day by watching the original Lakeside on the Lido deck. They were as high energy as I remember them from arena concerts 25 years ago. They turned it out. We went to the buffet for some Rick's fried chicken and then called it a night. What a first day. On Monday, Cheryl got started earlier than me. She went to the Soul Train gospel service and got her worship on. I made my way up to the buffet and had a nice smoked salmon and spinach omelet. On my way down, Cheryl and I had vowed to exclusively use stairs on this entire cruise, I saw a guy waiting for the elevator with a guitar case strapped to his back. My curiosity will always get the best of me, so I walked over to ask him who he played with. When he turned around, he looked familiar, but I couldn't figure out why. My brain just wasn't focusing. I asked, "Who do you play with?" He answered, "Best Kept Soul. We're out of Wilmington, Delaware." I told him I lived the majority of my adult life there. I left 15 years ago. He told me Best Kept Soul had been together for 15 years. Then I threw out my fail-safe landmark in any discussion about Wilmington. I said, "You remember the video store on Miller Road?" And he said, "Yeah, you were the owner. I used to come there for DVDs, and your wife had the Afrocentric store next door." Then it all came into focus why he looked so familiar. He was a loyal customer. What a coincidence.
Speaking of coincidences, turns out both our daughters, Keena and Shaunae, love Best Kept Soul and have been involved with the group in their professional lives. Well, we'll say more when Best Kept Soul is featured on the Joy of Cruising podcast in a few weeks. amazing reflecting back on the daily activity listings for the sea days on the Soul Train cruise. The activities were nonstop: lectures, line dance, classes, a matinee show in the afternoon with Thelma Houston. There was so much we didn't see. The next entertainment I saw was on the Lido deck. Bobby Wilson, son of the legendary Jackie Wilson. He was fun and had a 2025 version of Jackie Pompadour hairdo. One over-exuberant cruiser who reached for his hair, he respectfully told, "Oh, don't touch the hair."
Monday was T-shirt day, where you received the Soul Train Cruise T-shirt to wear at a Lido Deck afternoon party, with free drinks and a performance by the original Stone City Band. That's the band backing the late funk legend Rick James. The deck looked like just waves of orange, the color of this year's T-shirts, and many had on the orange Soul Train Cruise hats that had been delivered to the cabin. As I sat there waiting for showtime, I took full advantage of the free drinks, as this was one cruise where we didn't have the drink package. I found myself thinking that there is huge pressure on the guy who has to portray Rick James in his prime. As it turned out, no problem.
We'll be right back.
The Joy of Cruising podcast guests receive a gift sponsored by GigSky of a 3 gigabyte cruise plus land data package valued at $60. Relying on ship Wi-Fi is slow, unsecure, and sometimes not available. And at foreign ports, travelers don't want to pay their carriers high fees. GigSky provides a solution that will save them a significant amount of money. To get your own data package usable on the ship or in ports, here is my link to GigSky. https://gigsky.pxf.io/NLOXOR. This can be found in the show notes below. For a 10% discount, use the code Joy of Cruising.
What about the pressure on the woman who had to sing the Tina Marie parts? Again, no problem there either. Monday night was white night. We got dressed accordingly and then headed to the dining room. Again, great meal selections clearly reflective of the chefs we mentioned earlier. One regret we had was not taking a photo of each of the menus. I blew that. I just had a brain freeze, but I'm working on getting the chefs on the podcast anyway. I should point out that we were very impressed with each member of the waitstaff. Each dinner course was delivered in swift succession. You finish one and the next course is delivered and hot.
Unlike the pizza on the buffet, which was never hot.
Since you brought up the buffet, let me extend my comments to the service staff there as well. Generally seem more attentive than other lines. As soon as you finish a dish, they will take it up. They do not hesitate to refill your glasses, regardless of whether you're drinking water, lemonade, iced tea, or even hot beverages. In every way, we were pleased with the people part of food service. That makes us very happy as we're booked for Hal's flagship Rotterdam on a fantastic itinerary in the fall. So this is a good sign. Cheryl's comment about the pizza not being hot on the buffet brings up pizza in general. We don't expect much from buffet pizza, but I had heard good things about Hal's standalone pizza, and they did have a pizza spot audaciously titled New York Pizza. Well, I'm from New York, and I've eaten in places called New York Pizza wherever I have resided or visited in the United States. If you call yourself that, you better be good. For some odd reason, New York Pizza opened at 5 daily. Alas, we never made it there. That is typical of themed cruises. There's so much going on, you miss things. Again, we'll try Hal Pizza on Rotterdam.
There was a lot of entertainment happening on White Night. For Paul, it had to compete with the Lakers game, so I attended a few functions alone. First was Drew Hill at the World Stage, a great performance. Then I went to the Soul Train Comedy Club in the Rolling Stone Lounge to see my Delta Sigma Theta soror, Michelle. Together, we went to the World Stage to see the star of the week, Charlie Wilson. We have seen Charlie Wilson numerous times going back in the day with the Gap Band. We most recently saw him last summer at the Essence Music Fest in New Orleans. And just as he dominated the show then, he dominated the Soul Train cruise.
It's funny, with the passing of Prince a few years ago, perhaps other than maybe Stevie and Beyonce, 75-year-old recovering addict and cancer survivor, Uncle Charlie, is the first person we would choose to see live. He just keeps reinventing his show and reinventing himself. He performed a mix of Gap Band and Charlie Wilson solo hits, and even was so bold as to do his rendition of a hit he was featured on in the 80s, Computer Love, knowing that 2 nights later, it was going to be performed by the group that released the song that Uncle Charlie guested on, Zap. We'll compare later.
Come on.
A lot happening on Tuesday, and it was our first port stop, Costa Maya. It was the first time focusing on the exterior of New Amsterdam. When we were boarding, I didn't have this view of the ship. It was stark black and white, sharply contrasting with the brightly painted, multicolored, much larger NCL getaway dock next to it. We've been to Costa Maya several times. There's a lot to do around the pier if you're into shopping, eating, drinking, even swimming, or just don't want to take an excursion. We did our go-to in Costa Maya. Catch a cab over to Crazy Lobster and get $20 massages on the beach. So I won't be able to give my impression about spa services on How until the Rotterdam. Back on board, we shared a table at the buffet with a friendly couple from Miami. Just about everyone on this ship was friendly. Overwhelmingly, the ship demographic were baby boomers, i.e., roughly 60 to 80, and late Gen Xers, 45 to 59. This demographic, especially patrons of theme cruises, which tend to be significantly more expensive than regular cruises, is more mature and somewhat wealthier than the average cruise ship demo. Almost everyone I spoke to had been on the Soul Train cruise multiple times. Many also go on multiple theme cruises, and there are even cruisers who don't sail at all on traditional cruises. I spoke to one gentleman who has been on Soul Train cruise 11 times, and I am told of someone who has been on all the Soul Train sailings, which next year will be the 15th. The Miami couple we shared a table with had been on 7 times. They asked had we experienced Carol Riddick. We hadn't. They raved about her, and we made sure to catch her performance in the Rolling Stone Lounge.
Sometimes it's soft as a misty rain. I gently touches my soul. It pulls a fire that burns in me, and I simply lose control. So just rain down on me, let your love shower me, just rain on me, just rain down on me, let your love just follow me, just rain on me. Full as a dynamic capacity, my passions out to explode.
Oh man, have we been missing out. The epitome of grown and sexy music. Please, Carol, come back to Soul Train Cruise next year, and please start headlining on regular cruise ships if you are not already doing so. I may not have heard of her until our new friends told us at the buffet, but in researching Carol, she has been on recordings with and been a background singer for many of our favorites, like Jill Scott, Anthony Hamilton, and Music Soul Child.
This was superheroes and villains costume night. Not our thing, but we got a couple of fun photos of guests who really got into it. We chose this night to do our one foray into specialty dining, the Tamarind. We'll try more specialties this fall on the Rotterdam, as we have opted for Hal's Have It All package for that sailing. But we wanted to try Tamarind as its reputation preceded it. Again, the service was impeccable, and we thought the setting was quite romantic on the 11th deck, which initially we didn't know existed because most levels on the elevator went up to deck 9. For my starter, I ordered Jewels of the Sea shrimp wontons, baby bok choy, and lemongrass sesame broth. Paul started with satay sampler, Malaysian lamb, Chinese beef, Thai chicken, Indonesian pork, Vietnamese shrimp, and green mango. My main course was Penang red curry coconut chicken, crispy lotus, wok seared vegetables, roasted peanuts. And Paul's main was wasabi and soy crusted beef tenderloins with a side of Dungeness crab fried rice. We finished with green tea and dessert. The Tamarun lived up to its billing, and I am pretty sure we will try it again on Rotterdam. On Wednesday was a fun day. We stopped at Cozumel, Mexico. As we always do, even at Cozumel, which we have visited multiple times, we got off the ship, if nothing else, but to get our steps in. This evening's theme was Dress to Impress, Sneaker Ball. If you've never attended a sneaker ball, this is simply where you get dressed up, but wear sneakers with your outfit. I wore my Jordans my daughter had just given me for Christmas, and Paul wore these Nikes, Go Fly Ease orange, crimson, pink, and black pair. You heard that right, that you can't get from Nike anymore. He gets asked about them whenever he wears them. Now, we saw sneakers in glitter, gold lame, and sneakers that light up. We couldn't compete with those, but otherwise, we represented.
At the start of Wednesday's show on the world stage, featuring Zap, Jason Venner, a host on Star Vista Live's various theme cruises and who has been on the Joy of Cruising podcast before, episode 26, joined Tony Cornelius and made a couple of interesting announcements. He told us that Jeffrey Osborne, who was scheduled to perform in the next day or so, had COVID and regretfully had to drop out. He added, Jeffrey Osborne had added himself to February 26's cruise and also pointed out that they were working hard to replace Jeffrey for this cruise. The other interesting bit of info Jason shared was regarding next year's Soul Train cruise. He stressed the importance of signing up for booking next year's cruise on the ship because there was a waiting list for when tickets go on sale for next year's cruise of 2,000 fans. The music headliner was Zap, and they gave one of the best performances we had heard up to that point. Just for some quick background, Zap was started by Roger Troutman and accompanied by a tight band including his brothers, attained great heights in funk and R&B music in the 80s and 90s. As one of the brothers recounted on stage that night, on a fateful day in 1999, Roger and one of his other brothers passed away. The current version of the band features a couple of remaining Troutman brothers and includes the instrument Roger made famous, a custom-made talk box coupled with a synthesizer or guitar. There were actually two of them on the show. Roger's biggest song was a Grammy-nominated collaboration with Tupac and Dr. Dre, California Love, and Zap killed it. If I can go back to Charlie Wilson from a couple of nights earlier, during his set, Uncle Charlie informed the crowd that few people knew he sang on an 80s hit called Computer Love, which was originally released by Zap, and he performed his rendition of it. 2 nights later, Zap performed their own version. Who did it better? They both did it great, and we love the fact that Soul Train Cruise indirectly brought together two major acts that teamed up in the 80s back together again in the 2020s. I'll be honest, during Zap's set, I kind of hoped Uncle Charlie might join them on the stage. Wednesday night, we went to an amazing comedy show. This one held on the world stage and featured 5 comedians. Officially, the 4 who were billed on the Soul Train Cruise lineup. Touré, a longtime Philly favorite who is also the MC. Howie Bell, a hilarious comic from Detroit. Michelle, who Cheryl had seen earlier. And Sean Jones, who we had seen and made us cry with laughter. The 5th comedian, Mike Troy, aka Brooklyn Mike, was on the cruise as a guest, and Touré pressed him into action. He had the single funniest line of the 5. He said, "I went to a baby shower in Brooklyn, and the kid who the shower was for was there. You had to be there, but the crowd went crazy with laughter." In the next couple of nights, we went to individual performances by Howie Bell and Touré. We wish we could see Brooklyn Mike too. Both Touré and Howie Bell killed, and I hope we can get them on the podcast. Soul Train Cruise really came through in the area of stand-up comedy, which is a very big deal to many cruisers, us especially, whether on a theme cruise or a conventional cruise.
Thursday, today we stopped at an island that is first for us, Belize. Yet we decided not to do an excursion, which is atypical for us on the first time to a location. The reason is because we are coming back to Belize next month on a cruise of a much different nature, so we've already booked an excursion for it. Belize required us to tender, which at first seems like a hassle, but the tender ride is almost always pleasant, just a little time consuming. Once off the tender, we found the pier area very much laden with any kind of shop you can think, including shops openly selling Gucci knockoffs, and they were packed. There also were numerous Instagrammable photo spots. We went to a large restaurant bar with a DJ, and we had ordered the largest pina colada I had ever seen. Paul also ordered a Bellican, the beer produced in Belize.
Our first live entertainment on Thursday afternoon was with the great funk band Confunction on the Lido deck. As with all the other funk bands from back in the day, today's iteration, made up of a diminishing number of original members but augmented with energetic and talented younger members, is still funky. As an old school funketeer, it is important that this continues, and that's the wonderful promise of theme cruises like the Soul Train Cruise. Keep the funk alive. Speaking of old school funk, Thursday night, Mardi Gras night, was just dripping with it. Al McKay's Earth, Wind, and Fire Experience were on the world stage. Prior to the show, Jason mentioned a couple of performers that they had added to this year's cruise to replace Jeffrey Osborne, the Spinners and Glenn Jones. And he reminded us about the 2,000-person waiting list. I am an absolute Earth, Wind, and Fire fanatic from back in the day, and I suspect there were many of us on the Soul Train cruise. Grammy Award-winning Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, former Earth, Wind, and Fire guitarist Al McKay has a long legacy. For an Earth, Wind, and Fire fanatic like me, his band's performance was, next to Uncle Charlie, the act I anticipated most. They did not disappoint. They did acknowledge that Al McKay couldn't be there. We certainly hope Al is okay, but his band turned it out. We got to see comedian Howie Bell's individual show in the Rolling Stone Lounge. It was our first time seeing him individually rather than as part of the stage show with the other comedians. He was good then, but he was much funnier in an intimate setting like the Rolling Stone Lounge. And he did essentially a whole new set versus the funny one on stage that centered on his fat kids. Of course, I invited him to the podcast. Mardi Gras night ended with a performance by the Brothers Johnson, one of my favorites from back in the day. Discovered by Quincy Jones, featured two brothers, George Johnson, lead guitar, and Louis Johnson, bass player. They were known as Lightning Licks and Thunder Thumbs. I had seen them several times in their prime in the 80s, but had not seen them since Louis passed in 2015. I love the music of the Brothers Johnson.
Friday, sometime between Thursday, when host Jason reiterated there was a 2,000-person waiting list to book the 2026 Soul Train cruise, and Friday morning, we had the talk. No, not that one. We made the decision to come back to the Soul Train cruise in 2026. The lineup was a funk-loving boomer's dream, even better than this year. Morris Day in the Time, Johnny Gill, the Ohio Players, Cool in the Game, Third World, SOS Band, even a Ruben Studdard tribute to Luther, which we saw last year at home, which was great. It didn't hurt that Jason and Tony Cornelius added more to the lineup for the next year. Jimmy Jam, Fatback Band, Sugar Hill Gang, and reminded us that they had already added Jeffrey Osborne.
So, after lunch, I sat down in this huge line of cruisers waiting to book for next year. The line snaked around the corner, and I knew I was going to spend most of the afternoon there. In anticipation, I brought my iPad with me to work on upcoming podcasts and social media. At least there was coffee and cookies. It brought back memories of our first steam cruise, Festival at Sea. We also fell in love with our cruise experience then and went to a similar line to book Festival at Sea for the following year. I recall naive me at the time decided I would not wait in that long ass line and would just sign up online. Well, when the cruise opened up online, they were gone in an hour and I missed out. So this time I waited. We could hear music from the matinee show in the world stage. Will Hart of the Delphonics and Ted Mills of Blue Magic. Cheryl went to catch the show while I sat there and got work done. Getting up every 10 minutes or so to move up in the line. Now the tough part was over, getting agreement to go in 2026. I was admittedly worried about getting tickets, especially knowing some passengers in line ahead of us were getting tickets for themselves and for friends. Occasionally one of the salespeople would come out among the line and I would ask, "How's it looking?" Then she came out and said there were no more interiors, and I got nervous. But we made it to the magic room and were able to pick out our cabin for 2026 on the Howe Eurodam from Fort Lauderdale to St. Thomas and St. Martin. We celebrated that night, and we watched an individual performance by Touré. Man, another comedian who killed. I took a photo with him, and for once, I wasn't the tallest in the picture, as the 6'5" Philly comic provided me his contact info, and hopefully we can get him on the show in March.
Saturday, the last full day started the same way the first full day started, with a musical worship service. This time, they had the Soul Train Choir. I enjoyed both the service and the music.
Sampled the Littlemore Brothers Johnson. It was until this show that I caught the fact that George, the remaining living brother, was not even there. I had noticed a guy playing the guitar wearing a beret with glasses and thought that might be George, who most of us remember with the perfect huge fro from the 80s. It didn't take away from the power of the group, and I hope he is going to be okay, as they talked about it in a prayerful way. By the way, Lewis Johnson, Thunder Thumbs, passed away some time ago, as I mentioned. The current Thunder Thumbs, he didn't call himself that, but Andre could play that bass.
The last live act we got to experience was Shalimar, and that was a treat both to hear them sing songs that brought back great memories, as well as it was informative in terms of their place in R&B and funk history. Shalimar was created by record executive Dick Griffey and Soul Train's Don Cornelius. We walked in a little late, and it was comforting to hear that familiar lilt of Howard Hewitt's voice. We had seen him several times in the solo version of his career, especially when he was touring with smooth jazz artists like George Duke and Rochelle Farrell.
Y'all know about this? First verse. Help me out. Let me hear you real loud. Come on. I know you come home, baby, but you don't need that cornerstone. No. Oh, you really do it, baby. Making on your own. Hey, yeah. But you can't get away from love.
The other founding member of the group is Jeffrey Daniel, who became famous as a Soul Train dancer we loved on the show and who broke through. What we hadn't heard is that Jeffrey Daniel taught Michael Jackson how to moonwalk. The third member of the group is Carolyn Griffey, the daughter of Dick Griffey. We enjoyed our last meal in the main dining room, and that kind of leads me into regrets for the week. I should say last hot meal. In the morning before debarkation, there was a breakfast service of pre-made sandwiches, juices, and coffee. That was a first for us. Main dining room hot breakfast is a cruise tradition for us. That was a little bit of a letdown. But going back to the dinner in the main dining room, we regret we did not take photos of the menu, as that would help when we talked about the meals, which are all very good to excellent. Hopefully, if I get the chefs on the podcast, I can get each day's menu. Other regrets, they are all on us. Holland America Line and the Soul Train Cruise doesn't owe us a thing. I wish we had researched all the acts rather than choosing to see people I heard of. There were a lot I didn't see, and I can't imagine anyone not being good. If we hadn't sat next to the couple at lunch, we never would have checked out Carol Riddick, who was an absolute highlight. Had I researched her, there never would have been any hesitation to see her.
See you next year, Soul Train Cruise.
It was truly outstanding.
The Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted, each $16.99 plus shipping, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again for $18.99, can be ordered at the link on thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. The Joy of Cruising books are also available at Amazon. Order the ebook at Amazon or your favorite online retailer. Stay in touch by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or following the Joy of Cruising Podcast on Instagram. We're constantly adding new shows. Please leave a review and tell a friend about us. We hope you enjoyed this brief escape to the ocean. See you next week.